Today's gospel reading is a story we hear every year on the Sunday after Easter. Jesus visiting the hiding disciples on the day that he is raised. But one of the disciples, Thomas, is not there for some reason. But then a week later, Jesus comes back when Thomas has joined the rest of the disciples. A week later. That's what the English translation reads, but the Greek says, after 8 days. 8 days. Jesus could have come back and shown himself to Thomas anytime. He could have appeared later that night after Thomas returned, or he could have gone and found Thomas after visiting the disciples. Jesus could have come back the next day or any time in the following days. But Jesus waited 8 days. 8 long days. 8 days of Thomas hearing his friends insist that they saw Jesus. 8 days of wondering if his friends were imagining things out of their sadness and desperation and fear. Maybe 8 long days of wondering whether Jesus cared enough about him to actually visit him too. 8 days of wondering whether he would have to just take his friend's words for it, or if he would get to see Jesus himself. 8 days of wondering where Jesus was, what Jesus was doing, wondering if Jesus really had risen from the dead. Thomas was living in what we would call in-between times. The time between hearing of the resurrection and then meeting the resurrected Jesus face to face. And I wondered how Thomas was getting through those times. What was Thomas doing? Of course, we don't know much. John doesn't tell us much. But we do know one thing, is that Thomas was with his friends. Thomas was in his community. Thomas was spending time with other disciples of Jesus. And maybe this doesn't seem all that significant, but let's think about it. Thomas didn't let their certainty, when he felt none, destroy the relationship they had built. Thomas didn't keep his real thoughts to himself. He shared them with his community. He said them out loud. He said exactly what he's thinking. Unless I see, unless I feel, unless I have the evidence for myself, I won't believe. Thomas may have had his doubts, but at least he was honest. He didn't pretend to believe because everyone else around him said they saw Jesus. And his friends, for their part, his community, the other disciples, they kept hanging out with Thomas. We don't know from today's text how they actually responded to his words, but we do know that they kept spending time together. And we know this because 8 days later, they were all still up in that room when Jesus returned. The other disciples didn't shun Thomas because he didn't believe the same things that they did right at that moment. They didn't cast him out as an unbeliever. They didn't reject him because he said he wanted proof. They accepted him where he was at. Unbelief and all, they remained a community. We know from today's gospel reading that after those 8 long days, Jesus finally does present himself to Thomas. There's no judgment. He identifies what Thomas said he needed, and then he offered it. Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side." No shaming, no mocking, no, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed." There's compassion. There's a desire for Thomas to believe. And there is that recognition of those who believed without seeing. And you know, we are living in times that are much like those same 8 long days. Those times that I call the in-between times. We have read and heard the stories that Jesus is resurrected. We have faith in the promises of God, the promise of resurrection and new life for all of us. But we are still in the in-between. We may find ourselves feeling like we are at the beginning of those 8 days, or maybe somewhere in the middle, unsure of how long this in-between time is going to last. We may find ourselves rejoicing, like the disciples did, at some of the ways we have seen Jesus, some of the ways that God has been at work in our lives, in our communities. Or we may find ourselves confused, like so many characters in the resurrection stories that we will hear in the upcoming weeks. We may understand some things, but feel totally lacking in understanding others. We may feel disoriented because Jesus isn't showing up in the ways we might expect. Maybe we are doubting and wondering now, or have had recent memories of doubt. Maybe we have friends who are struggling with their faith. What we learn from Thomas and from John is the importance of community. A community like Thomas's, people willing to receive honesty and not judge. A community that lives out the legacy of Jesus. A community that is open and accepting and does not judge others by their doubts and fears. We also learn that God does not judge us based on where we are in our faith journey. Instead, God is there to gently guide us, encourage us to be honest in saying what we need, like Thomas sharing what he needed, and bringing these needs into community. And we are encouraged to hold tight to our faith community, not move away from it when things are hard, or when we maybe have some doubt or feel lost. This story of Thomas is about sharing honestly where we're at and continuing in the relationship we've built over time. Regardless of where our life of faith finds us, God is with us, accompanying us on all points of our faith journey, and all points of our life. And at their best, faith communities do the same. And this is really good news. Because in this, we learn that there is room for the believers and room for the unbelievers and everybody in between. There is room for faith and there is room for doubt. There is room for those who believe without seeing and room for those who feel like we need to see something. There is room for us all. There is room for our honesty and for our needs. We can show up where we are, like Thomas did. And we can embrace those who bring their needs and honesty. We can wait together in community in these in-between times for Jesus to show up in the ways we need him to. Amen.